Okay, well, welcome everybody to webinar 2 of our Market Trends webinar series. This webinar is on trends in coffee roasting and consumption. So we have live captions today. So you should find at the bottom of your screen, there should be an option to show captions. And so click on that little up arrow there that's in the circle. And then if you go and you slide over this button, translation, then you should be able to find your translation language. So please do that. Should be a number of languages for you to choose from. We will all be speaking in English today, and then it will directly translate on your screen. So we'll start with an introduction to the Chain Collaborative, who we are. So we're an organization co-creating opportunities and strengthening capacities for community-led change in the coffee sector. We wholeheartedly believe that coffee communities make the best decisions about their own development, and that change should come from them, from local leadership. So our primary model is the Community-Led Development Incubator Program, where we invest in local leaders to design, carry out, and measure the impact of their own initiatives. And after the incubator, participants join our alumni network, and through that network, they're able to continue learning and working together to create change in their communities. And so through the alumni network, we manage a number of learning opportunities, webinars being one of them. And in this last year, our alumni mentioned wanting to learn more about market trends. And so this is the second webinar of a 3-part series. The last webinar is coming up on November 6th. It will be on trends in coffee valuing and pricing. Today, we're, of course, launching the webinar on trends in coffee roasting and consumption. And there's also the first webinar, which was trends in coffee green coffee production and processing, which is available on our YouTube channel. So if you weren't able to take a look at that, then please do so. And this webinar is being launched in collaboration with Coffee Knowledge Hub. So we thank you for joining us in this effort and spreading the word. So now we will introduce our speakers. So we have today with us Ashley Whelan, Director of Coffee and Green Buyer at Oil Coffee; Namisha Parthasarathy, co-founder of Aramse Coffee; Octavio Ruiz Cervera from Mexico City, founder of Negra Cafe; and then Sara Yirga, Managing Director of YA Coffee Roasters and New Phase Trading and Coffee Services. So thanks to all of you for being here today. So I will stop my screen share. Miranda is back. So thank you so much, Miranda.
Yeah, so sorry. My gosh.
No worries. So why don't you introduce yourself briefly as our moderator, and then you can jump right into the questions.
Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name's Miranda. I am a 2025 Sustainability Fellow with the Chain Collaborative, and I'm also a coffee educator based in Austin, Texas. I teach a mix of home baristas as well as professional level baristas. So I'm very happy to see all of you in the participants, and excited to get started with our amazing panelists. So let's just before we get started, just wanted to remind you, maybe Nora already did this, but there is a Q&A feature in the webinar. So if you have any questions, please drop them there, and we will have some time for questions and answers at the end of the conversation. So great. Octavio, I think you're up first. So your question is, from your perspective, what does the word trend really mean? What does the Mexican market seem to value most, or what is most prevalent when it comes to coffee consumption? And how does that shape the kinds of trends that you see locally?
Thank you, Miranda. Well, for me, the word trend often creates an illusion. It makes us focus on what's new instead of what's real. Here in Mexico, we are in a unique position. We are both a producing country and a consuming country. Yet around 80% of Mexicans still drink instant coffee, and most of that coffee doesn't even come from Mexico. So when we talk about trends, we are often describing a very small urban niche, one that looks aspirational but doesn't necessarily reflect the broader reality of how coffee lives in our culture. Here, uh, coffee is a social act, not a technical one. We drink in the afternoon or at night to gather, to talk, to slow down, not just to wake up. That means that quality here isn't always about cup scores, it's about the moment of connection it creates. Um, if we look at parallel markets like milk, we can see how these trends reshape practice. Here in Mexico City, most people now drink lactose free or oat milk. So, as a roaster, we have to ask what does our coffee taste like with these milks. And for the small percentage that still drinks whole milk, we ask this question: do we even have access to local dairies anymore? um, Another example, talking about trends, is Café del Bienestar, is wellness coffee. It's a government-led soluble coffee that brings together more than 6,000 small producers. It's not specialty coffee, but it's an honest reading on the market. It recognizes that most Mexicans drink soluble coffee, and that inclusion matters. But not every trend is urban or technological. Some are agronomic. Everyone talks about post-harvest process, these experimental processes, carbonic maceration, anaerobic fermentation, but no one talks about soil nutrition. In many producing regions, the organic trend has become so strong that producers stop fertilizing altogether, afraid their coffee will lose market access. And that has consequences for soil health, for yield, and for long term sustainability. So, not every trend is about innovation or aesthetics. Some are about access, care, and survival. As roasters, we shouldn't just follow trends, air roasting, convective roasting, radiant heat, but rather understand the systems that make them possible and connect local realities to meaningful markets. In the end, a trend should not only follow consumption, it should help us rethink the system that defines what we drink and how we consume what we drink.
Thank you, absolutely. And like you said, these roasting and consumption standards have been long defined by importing countries. Namisha, what changes are you seeing in India as producing countries begin to reclaim that space?
Hey, Miranda, thank you. And thank you, Octavio. India is actually a very interesting case study because we're at the confluence of several different factors. We've always been a coffee producing country and we've always consumed coffee, but that's been restricted in the south of India. But as you see, globally, as countries' GDPs grow, coffee consumption tends to increase because it is an aspirational beverage. And so you are seeing more and more interest in sort of more premium and and specialty coffee in the organized sectors of urban markets, not in rural markets. And the younger generation is now starting to switch from tea or chai, which is how it's been consumed in India, to more and more coffee. I think the way India is structured, we've always had very, very high import duties on foreign coffee, so we haven't had access to anything from abroad. And I think that the market has kind of existed in this little bubble. But the way that innovation has happened, it means that now local farms, instead of exporting a bulk of their coffee, which always or almost always used to be commoditized, at least the bigger farms that have more resources and money to do so have been upskilling and investing more resources into having more premium coffee, and that has been feeding the domestic market because that's pretty much all we have access to. And the way you sort of see that feeding into, at least as a consumer, is as you see domestic brands grow, typically, I would say even, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a big desire from young Indian consumers to look at flavor notes and replicate, and roasters to replicate what we've been seeing in the West, whether it's to use the flavor wheel or even just to, sorry, take cue from our Western counterparts. And now slowly, what you're seeing is more and more of local um, tasting notes on bags. So people now, roasters now use words like tamarind and jaggery and marigold and figs, which is very much catering to a domestic audience and not an international audience at all. And from speaking to the larger farms that have been exporting, I think in the span of just 5 years, a lot of them have gone from exporting sort of 70 to 80% and now that ratio has been completely flipped. And I think it's because one, Indian coffee has had this perception of being sort of lower grade, commodified for a long time abroad. And now they're able to create value and actually get more money for higher quality coffee that's carefully grown domestically because consumers and roasters are willing to pay for it. So so I think that's the sort of overall trend we're seeing in India. And if you think about numbers, obviously India has a big unorganized cafe sector. But if you just look at the premium segment, I think reports in 2024 suggested it was about an $800 million market. And the expectation is that in 2029, it's going to be a $2.2 billion market if you look at just the premium segment of the organized cafe sector. So yeah, that's a bit about India.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you. And we're so privileged on this panel to have people from all over the world. So, Sarah, we'd love to hear more about Ethiopia. What influences local consumption there, and what do you think specialty or quality, and we kind of put these in air quotes, right? Because it really depends on what you're talking about. But what does specialty quality mean in your context, and how might the meaning differ from the definitions that have been popularized globally?
Thank you for having me. This is an interesting opportunity, and thank you, Namisha and Octavio. That was such an educational conversation from you too. For Ethiopia, coffee consumption did not need any trend. It was there from the beginning, like, from the origin, where it is believed that Ethiopia is the origin of coffee, so is now South Sudan and other neighboring countries. But trend is for us to just maintain what historically our foremothers generations carried on to this modern time, where we have to sit down around coffee, like Octavio said, have a meaningful conversation about family, about social issues, about economics. And that's where we resolve also our many challenges. I can give you a good example. If you remember, in early 80s, 90s, 90s actually, HIV was rampant, and the discrimination of people living with it was extremely, that was the one factor that really affected the people than the disease in itself. So the one thing Ethiopia did was having a conversation around coffee on the streets, like gathering people on the streets, making coffee. So if you smell coffee roasting manually, then you will actually walk. You don't walk by, you just walk into that ceremony and, see what's happening on the streets. Like, let's have a conversation. And that's how we beat the fact that people were not discriminated anymore. They were supported and given the care they needed at that time. So that's one good example. So I don't call this a trend, it's a lifestyle. So we don't, like, coffee is a lifestyle in Ethiopia. And if you don't drink coffee, you're looked at like a stranger. If you're Ethiopian and you don't drink coffee, you're like a stranger. Of course, there are people that don't consume coffee. Now we are at a population of 130 million. approximately. And I can tell you, except the very young and some people that have sensitivity for coffee, we consume coffee and we have the capacity to just absorb everything we produce, but we have to export, right? So that's what I can say about trend. But about specialty, isn't it about having freshly roasted, having the experience? A specialty is about, experience, freshness, and of course the flavor and the grading that follows. For us, we have met, I think, two of the major specialty characters, which is freshness and experience. And experience is worth it. If that's how we label specialty, quote unquote. But I just came out of this meeting about the specialty coffee association we're about to start in Ethiopia, and we were talking about how, let's say, the cup of excellence influenced how we perceive specialty and how even the current market was affected by. Because cup of excellence made everyone aware that there is another world, like we can bring more resources, more premium to the producers, and so that comes as a priority as a nation because we need the foreign currency. Coffee culture, on the other hand, in the urban setting, is influenced by the Italian culture, because the little time the Italians had in Ethiopia, they really left a big mark in the coffee culture. So our urban coffee shops are like mainly dark roast. I don't think many people take espresso, but of course, the milk beverages are very popular, mainly macchiato. So if we can call that a trend, it has been there like for the last, let's say, 75 years or 80. So I don't think that's trendy anymore. That there are these up and coming young professionals these days that are learning baristas, latte art, and different brewing methods, be it the Chemex, the pour over techniques. Those are just popping up, not big enough to just brag about. So this is where we are in terms of coffee trends and specialty.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Very cool. Ashley, so last but not least, what are you seeing in the United States, and what do you think is shaping the trends that you're witnessing at this moment?
So first off, thank you everybody in Chain Collaborative for having me here and everyone else on this panel. It's very humbling to be the only roaster from the US on this panel. And I think that goes into the overarching theme of what we're talking about here and some of my points. So I think, there's a dozen things we could talk about as far as trends, rise of ready to drink beverages, decaf, different species of coffee outside of Arabica and Robusta. But I picked out three kind of overarching themes that I think are the trends that we're seeing, no matter where you sit in the market, as far as the US. So the first one, going toward the fact that what everyone has said so far, and I'm the only US person here, roasting trends and flavor trends are not just about flavor, but who gets to define them. And so I think that's the biggest thing that we're seeing here in the US. The future is not just about the global north and us defining for so long and saying, we've discovered this coffee, we've discovered this producer, we've told them how the coffee should taste and how they should process it and treat it. And we're now in a spot where I think we're realizing we're a small piece in this value stream and we're a participant more than anything. And we're someone that can amplify the work being done by producing countries, especially if we want to keep coffee around. I would say my second point kind of goes to a word that Octavio used, which is connection. I think the most valuable part of being a US coffee buyer is that I feel like I am in a space to translate and connect consuming and producing countries. And so we're still seeing such a rise in people's interest in specialty coffee and coffee in general, more brewing at home for sure. So I think the consumers really want to have a connection to where the coffee comes from and not necessarily be hit with greenwashing or hit with all these values that don't necessarily like walk the walk or have anything to back it up, but they want to see a company authentically living their values and showcasing that in not only the service they provide, but also how the coffee gets to them, what we're saying our relationship is with that coffee. And finally, I would say that to another point Octavio made is about trends not just necessarily being based on flavor or cup score, but about we're all facing climate change, we're all facing a market price increase crisis. And I think we are collaborating and doing this all together. And so innovation looks different when it's driven by necessity, resilience, and creativity. And that's in a producing context. And I think that is more valuable and not secondary to flavor and kind of what we've been focusing on in the recent history. So those are my 3 points for this conversation.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Octavio, coming back to you, we're talking about we're seeing more and more producing countries roasting coffee domestically and consuming. So what barriers still exist for producers or local roasters who want to roast and sell coffee domestically or regionally instead of exporting their green coffee? What would you recommend to people in Mexico, and maybe anybody we have in the audience today who may be interested in exploring this opportunity?
Well, Mexico is in a very interesting position right now. We have a real opportunity to break away from the export model and strengthen domestic markets. But at the same time, new extractive pressures are emerging. USA buyers are once again turning to Mexico since we are the only producing country with a 0% export tariff that makes Mexico attractive but also vulnerable. Uh, the main barriers are infrastructure, connection, and knowledge. Many small producers only have wet mills, not only dry mills, so they often can't process coffee fully or reach urban markets directly. There is also a communication gap between rural and urban Mexico, not only in language, but in how value and quality are understood. Um, Another barrier is epistemic, the idea that quality must always be validated by external systems is deeply rooted. I am a curator, and that experience has taught me both to learn and to unlearn. Um, so access to that knowledge is valuable, but it must be reinterpreted from our own realities with an understanding of where it comes from and who it serves. Um, there was a documentary a few years ago called A $6 Cup of Coffee, which explored these very tensions. Producers from Chiapas who wanted to roast and sell their own coffee were told that it was impossible, that the market will never accept roasted coffee from origin. And yet today, we see coffee shops in the United States buying coffee from Berlin, or coffee shops from the Middle East buying from Copenhagen. So the question is not if it's possible, is who gets to make it possible. That show us that the obstacle was never logistics, it was narrative and power. uh, Here in Mexico, we're starting to see small producers roasting and selling their coffee locally, ground and packaged for nearby communities. Obviously, it's not large scale, but it's significant. It keeps value close to where the coffee is grown. That helps producers develop these local markets rather than depending on export chains or even urban markets as ours. I think that's one of the most concrete ways to redistribute value. So my recommendation is start small, stay local, build connections, use open source tools like Artisan, create small roasting networks, share what you learn with others. Uh, each region can build its own ecosystem, small, sustainable, and culturally rounded. Um, we need to stop romanticizing origin. Uh, not every farmer is a campesino. Some are landowners, other works communally, other rents. Particularly Mexico is a very plural landscape, and I think diversity is part of its strength. Also, looking for other productions like honey or cacao helps build stronger local systems and shared infrastructure. These interconnections makes community more resilient and less dependent on external markets. And because the future of Mexican coffee isn't about exporting better beans, it's about creating value and dignity where coffee grows, and showing that what seemed impossible, uh, yeah, showing that what once seemed impossible has a well-being with reach once we look at it from the ground up.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Namisha, back to you. Let's talk about the same thing, but in the context of India. So, what are some other barriers that shape your local realities?
Um, you mean as a consumer of coffee or as a roaster?
Right, for domestic consumption.
For domestic consumption. So um I think the biggest challenge, or one of the challenges with India is you do see a lot of hype around modern coffee and specialty coffee as people that would not have otherwise drunk coffee are now starting to drink coffee. So it's a new market that's being developed, which is why it's so hard to gauge really how big the market is. So there has been a lot of hype, and we take a lot of our cues from the West. I think, sort of looking for this external validation, like Octavio said, is very, very deep rooted in India as well. So I think a big challenge is how, and we also have most of Indian coffee producers are very, very small holders. So if you're looking at premium coffee, then you're looking at like a very select few farms that are able to kind of cater to this market, which means that you actually could end up with a lot of fluff when it comes to brands because you're getting it from the same 5 or 6 different farms, and really people are getting similar types of coffees, but then there's a lot of spin and fluff and hype around it. And I think maybe what Indians need to do domestically is to really look inward and think about why we're drinking coffee. I mean, a big part of why I got into coffee is because of the social connection. I'm from the south of India, where coffee drinking has been much more a part of our culture than it has been in other parts of India. And so if you look at, the cultural aspect of coffee and the community building aspect of coffee, and then look at how you can improve the quality of coffee both for consumers and for the farmers in terms of what price they get. That I think is the question that we really need to answer. And right now I think India is maybe going through a little bit of a wave of um, a lot of focus on branding, packaging, storytelling. And then I think maybe just need to go back a bit to our roots. And the other thing, and the other point is, I strongly agree that we need to kind of stop romanticizing producing countries. It's a big reason why I think a lot of times when you look at producing countries that produce objects or things other than just coffee, it's sort of viewed as kitsch or novelty when it's kind of bought abroad, and it fills a very narrow box in terms of why people are purchasing something from a producing country. But people don't tend to view it on par with other objects that are created, say, in the global north. And this is something we face in coffee. So, for example, in the south of India, where coffee drinking has been around for generations, we what's been really popular to use is the South Indian filter. And now that filter has kind of gotten stuck in I guess, in yesteryear. And so a big part of what our company's been trying to do is to kind of modernize Indian culture and coffee drinking for specialty and modern coffee, and to kind of remove it from the baggage of this overly romanticized, oh, my grandmother used to brew this cup, and so I must try and replicate that, and to actually showcase Indian design, Indian quality, and Indian value for what it is. So I think education is another big challenge. I think educating both the consumer and the and then obviously roasters need to upskill themselves in terms of where and how we actually create sustainable value. Um, but yeah, that would be my 2 cents in terms of where we go from here.
Thank you. Sarah, looking ahead, what role do you think producing countries like Ethiopia will and or should play in defining the future of roasting and coffee culture globally? Are you with us, Sarah?
Miranda,
Yeah.
Sarah just texted and asked if we could switch to Ashley first, and
Oh,
then
sorry. Yeah, of course.
the
It's
power
some
is getting cut
connectivity.
in where
Yeah,
she is. Yeah.
absolutely. No worries at all, Ashley. Um, Thank you. Is there anything else that you see that might be missing from the conversation today when we talk about trends? So hopefully we can come back to Sarah to speak on Ethiopia, but from your perspective, what else could we look out for as coffee professionals?
Again, so many things, but in the interest of time in this conversation, so I think thinking really about where trends have come from have been a theme here and who's defining them. So sustainability is always at the forefront of what I think about. So many times we see, especially with some innovation lately around process forward coffees and fermentation, there's so much hype that can be around words because they sound exciting, like hydrothermal shock and, Octavio pointed out carbonic maceration, but where are those coming from and who are they for? Something that I think I forgot to mention earlier is that we're seeing so much more autonomy from producers coming out of smaller exporters and importers in different countries that are really catering towards providing education to producers and then learning from them what their coffee needs to be sustainable and consistent and work for them and be a product they're proud to sell. And so I think that that is definitely something that is missing in the conversation of when we see a certain process being used in competition on an international level and other producers hear about it. Why are they using it? So, and intentionality and who's it for, and is it helping the product, and is this something that's gonna help them be a sustainable farm in the long term? And I think that's something that I want to talk about a lot whenever I talk about fermentation. I think I mentioned when we were preparing for this call that I had an existential crisis with a few things that I'm going to answer in this question, but one of them being processes outside of washed honey natural and how we're talking about them and why they get seen as exciting. And I think they can be exciting, but I think it's the story behind it, which is probably producer driven more than anything, is the exciting part of it, and not necessarily just because of flavor, because fancy terminology. I think another thing that Namisha had asked me to talk about, I think when we were preparing for this call, was, how as US roasters can we co-create stories and have it not just be from the roaster's perspective? So I guess an example of that, which I think can end part of this question of like, what can we be focusing on and what are we missing? So many times the conversation from the story is about the company that's roasting the coffee, and I think the stories can change. So an example of how I've done that as a roaster is one of those smaller exporters that I started working with was Mountain Harvest out of Uganda. I started working with them in 2019. There wasn't necessarily a lot of promises or huge business transactions to begin with. It was very small, a few bags, but for about 4 or 5 years as they were starting out, I would catalog cup all of their coffees without a conversation of like, what am I looking for or what do I think Ugandan coffee should taste like. I was presented with what their experiments were and what their versions of a washed honey or more experimental processes were, and most of the time it was blind, and I just gave feedback on where I thought my opinions were. I'm not the only one because my opinion is also very small, and so there's a whole other market that likes different types of naturals than I do. But it was an honor to work with them for 4 or 5 years to give them feedback and then buy small amounts of coffee and then continue that feedback cycle in a peer collaboration to figure out how we can not only scale their production, but then continue to scale what I was buying from them as a roaster as well. And I think that collaboration was such a beautiful story because it was not just transactional, it was really transformative in how they worked and then also how I received their coffee. And we were able to scale over time. And that story was, it became one where even when the coffee didn't necessarily always show up in the way we expected because of logistical errors, the company was still so behind it because of that long-term relationship and because the work we were doing together. So I don't know if that answered your question, Namisha, but that is one way that I kind of co-created and collaborated, where it was more about the country of Uganda telling me what was sustainable for them and me figuring out how I can sell it and tell their story. And one that now I've brought to my new roaster, so I'm very proud of that. And I think lastly, so I don't take up too much time, looking forward not only to your next webinar, but CVA, so the coffee value assessment, was something else that put me on an existential crisis this year because I've been so used to the Q form for the past 12 years. But I think even in just the last month, to be honest, I realized that the Q form already kind of teed up what we thought coffee should taste like. It was going to skew certain scores towards bright, more clarity in coffee. And now with the CVA, which I know you're going to get into more into the next webinar on November 6th, but it invites more perspectives. Another term Octavio used that I really loved was more plurality. So we have more diversity and more plurality in how we're talking about coffee because roasting is happening in producing countries as well. And so there's more being brought to the table as far as like what coffee should taste like and how it can taste and what we care about it tasting like. And so the CVA gives us more perspectives. It has a full spectrum on what is value, whether it's sensory, emotional, cultural, relational. And so I'm really excited to I'm taking the class finally next month. So I'm really excited to do that and see how it affects our industry and how it opens up the conversation more. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking forward to that next webinar as well. It will be a good natural extension of what we've been discussing. Sarah, I'm going to come back to you if you're with us. I know that you had to take your, we just lost her again. What do you think, Nora? Should we hop into the Q&A or?
Yeah, let's go ahead and hop
Okay.
into the Q&A, and then when she comes back, we'll ask her. So I
Okay,
already
great.
have one question in the chat, or in the Q&A.
I see one in the chat, so let's go to Jerry's question. Thank you so much for joining us, Jerry. They're also wondering, could you share your thoughts on the growing role of cold brew and other RTD coffees, including decaf options, not only for consumption in general, but especially in light of how younger generations are drinking less alcohol and are now organizing coffee center gatherings or coffee parties? This is an interesting question. I would be curious to hear if this is I know that this happens in the US, but I'd love to hear from Octavio and Namisha if this is also a trend that you're seeing, and if there's any answer you have to this, go for it, Namisha.
Yeah, so it's definitely a trend we're seeing in India, and funnily enough, it's something that you see a lot more in, say, tier 2 cities, so not the biggest urban metros, but the next segment of cities. This is twofold. One, I think the number of options in terms of where the younger generation can go is fairly limited, and India also has it has a dry state, for example, so where alcohol isn't permitted. So this allows like the younger generation to participate in social gatherings, which are not involved around coffee. And there's an example of a roaster like this who started a cafe in a tier 2 city called Nagpur. And anyone who travels from a bigger city like Bombay or Delhi or Bangalore is always absolutely amazed at how packed their cafes are. And he has started this trend, which I think is fairly common in the US as well, of these coffee raves. So getting like a really popular DJ and then having their cafe being absolutely packed with sort of really loud banging music at like 6 p.m. or something. So it's definitely something you see more and more of. And I think cold brew um, as has been sort of like a natural extension of what has been popular in India before, which is cold coffee. And obviously, like cold coffee was like prepared with a lot of sugary sweeteners and things like that. But cold brew is definitely seeing a rise in consumption here as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Sarah, if you're with us and you'd like to jump in here, we're just wondering, looking ahead, what role you think Ethiopia and other producing countries should play in defining the future of roasting and coffee culture globally. And then we have a few other questions in the chat that we can get to, but we'd love for you to weigh in. Sarah, can you hear us?
We can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear us.
Okay, well, maybe we'll answer one more Q&A and come back. But if you connect, please just jump right in. Octavio, yes, your hand is raised. If you'd like, do you see a question you'd like to answer there?
Yeah, the
Okay.
one about local and exporting prices.
Great, yeah, let's
pricing,
do.
yeah.
Mhm.
Actually, local pricing can be better than exporting pricing, especially when we buy directly from producers. Most export contracts are based on FOB pricing, which means the producers pays to get the coffee to the port, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away. Locally, we buy ex works, which means the coffee is sold directly from the farm or local warehouse. That reduces logistics cost and can increase the producer's net income. So for us, working locally is not only viable, it's fairer and often more profitable for both sides. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Emma is wondering, are you all seeing any change in the kind of coffee that you can buy? Are farmers having more of a say in processing? Are you seeing more blends based on the current prices in the market? Is this impacting buying relationships at all? I feel like, Namisha, you were kind of speaking on this a little bit in terms of what Indian coffee producers are going for and what they're able to do. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that question? Octavio, your hand is still raised. I don't know if that means you want to. Okay.
There we go. Sorry.
All right. No worries. Yeah. And we have Sarah too. So Sarah, if you're with us, just say that we'll be listening for you. So
I can
Ashley,
weigh in
yeah,
on that if you want. Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
I think some of what I was talking about in the last question too, I do believe, I do not know the percentage. I still think probably in the grand scope of things, it's relatively small, but I do believe producers are feeling more empowered to have a say in processing through them being able to work with, exporters or folks that are able to give them like the market access for that power and show them like how they can do that. And so I do think, I think there's more coffee processes than ever to be able to buy. So as far as like what's available to buy and changing what we buy, I've had to open my mind to so many things that I thought was closed off previously, and understand how I can tell a story that relates to my values surrounding things like heavy processing or co-ferments. And that has been driven by the producers telling me why it works for them. And so that has something that has changed just in the last few months. And then to answer the blends, data driven, I do think blends are increasing, especially this year with the price of coffee, because they are more price approachable usually. What does that mean? It's relative, because now the blends cost the same price as the single origins used to. But so I think we're seeing people still want to buy specialty coffee, but potentially buying more bags of the blends and then, sprinkling in bags of single origin offerings here and there. And so I have bought less volume, not necessarily less variety, but less volume of the single origins. But I try to focus on making sure that the single origins also come from the places that we're buying the blend from for greater impact, and buying in different levels. And so having those conversations with our partners about like, okay, here's where my volume might be shifting ahead of time, I think is how I navigate that in a way that, feels good for everybody involved, and so that producers can plan what they're going to make. So that fully answers the question, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Thanks for weighing in. Does anyone else have any thoughts on farmers having an input in processing methods? Namisha, yeah.
So yeah, so obviously this is not firsthand because I'm not a green coffee buyer, but we work closely with roasters and then obviously also have a coffee subscription, so we're fairly connected with customers. And so I think because of how small the Indian market is in terms of the farms that are actually able to invest the resources required to test out all of these different processing methods. And then given how tight the feedback loop can be if they have direct relationships with roasters that are based in India, they are able to weigh in more and more in terms of what processes they want to engage with or experiment with, and you know what might seem like it would be viable for them. We've also seen, again, this is very anecdotal. There's the younger generation of of farmers who are sort of like fifth generation farmers who are actually taking the farm as a whole and kind of building a brand around the farm itself. So, you know, they're sort of realizing that the farm doesn't need to be tied to roasters and that there's a lot of value and education that can happen at the farm level that they can take control of. And I think in those instances, we are seeing them drive the dialogue in terms of both in terms of process experimentation and the kinds of coffee that they think would be sustainable for the Indian market, because there's so much more connected to the ground reality in terms of both climate change and um, what other plants can be grown in you know, alongside coffee. So you know, a lot of the times the younger generation farmers that are more actively involved on social media, they tend to post about figs and avocados and and the seasonal relevance of different flora and fauna alongside coffee. And I think that's been much more exciting as a consumer to kind of see that process and them contribute to, I guess, innovation in specialty coffee. So of course, with the smaller farms, they don't have both the capacity and the resources in terms of money to experiment. But I think what's increasingly happening is roasters that are able to, or have deep enough pockets, are able to set aside a little bit of a little bit of their money to kind of do smaller experiments. I think similar to what Ashley was talking about with Mountain Harvest in Uganda, and to kind of do it on a much smaller scale and pre-buy coffee for the next harvest. So a lot of the risk is taken away from the smaller farmers. But you know, so I think it's starting at the bigger farms, and then hopefully we see it trickle down.
Yeah, very interesting. We have a lot of great questions in the chat here, so and we have 8 more minutes, so I think we can get to most of them. But let's see. Do you think the power balance between roasters and producers is shifting in any meaningful way, besides the more direct trade models? This is an interesting question. Does anyone feel inspired? I feel like maybe Octavio or Ashley would have an interesting take on this one. I think that just to jump in, I think that we lost Sarah, but we have her in a group chat, and I'm just looking at the Q&A right now, and I think if it's okay with you, Nora, it might be nice to get an answer to Winnie's question about how smallholder farmers in East Africa can position themselves to benefit from trends in roasting. Maybe if we can get Sarah to answer that off, like in the chat, and we can drop it in the alumni network or something like that, I think that would be great. But yeah, okay, let's go back to the power balance between roasters and producers. Ashley or Octavio, any thoughts there?
I hope so. That's my first thought is, well, I hope so. Otherwise, I feel like, yeah, the past 14 years that I've been doing this is for naught. But maybe Octavio has more concise thoughts. I mean, I think there's a lot more we can continue to do through conversations like this, and more buyers and roasters speaking out and having the focus be on producers. I think, you know, with data and statistics, I have no idea what that change looks like, but I know that anecdotally it feels that way, and I hope it feels that way for producers, some producers, and I would love to learn what else they need us to be doing.
as Ashley said, yeah, I hope so. As you may know, my answers are very locally based. So also my answer is I don't know. I hope so. And Miranda, I would like to jump to James Alexander question. Yeah, that one.
Absolutely, go for it. Yeah, I saw that one too. I was like, yeah, go for
Yeah,
it.
it's a great question.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, roasted at origin coffees can absolutely be part of sustainability strategy, but not only by buying them. The real impact comes when roasters and coffee shops share knowledge, build roasting capacity at origin, and create feedback loops instead of one-way transaction. So, yeah, include roasted at origin coffees, but also share the tools that research that makes roasting and sensory analysis accessible to producers. I think that's the scope. Mhm.
Wonderful. Um, Great. Um, Namisha, would you be interested in answering how you blend tradition with emerging trends authentically? I feel like you've done a really great job with that with your Sophie, the South Indian coffee filter that your company came up with. Would you like to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that there's just one way to do it. I think I can speak, from our own experience and in terms of what we have tried to do. So I think when we set out with the South Indian filter, it was actually, we didn't actually start off thinking we wanted to create Sophie. We we tried to brew specialty coffee with it and struggled a lot more than we would have liked to. And I think that's kind of sent us down the rabbit hole. And then through that process, we realized that there was a lot of great things about the brewer just as an independent standalone brewer. The fact that it was travel friendly, it was made from stainless steel, it didn't use paper, you didn't need paper filters, you didn't need an electric source. So here was this sustainable brewer that was just kind of sitting in plain sight and wasn't being I mean, and it was kind of running the risk of going extinct. But then it also lacked things that we needed in order for it to be relevant for modern coffee. It's hard to share recipes when you have 50 different brewers that all are of different shapes and sizes. And so looking at that coffee brewing experience beyond just the home and kind of saying, oh, we can have communities around it. That was sort of what drove us to develop Sophie. I think the way to do it authentically is maybe sort of similar to what Ashley was mentioning, which is to really listen to the dialogue coming out of producing countries and not to view them as purely suppliers of raw coffee, but actually resources for innovation, design thinking, thought leadership. Uh, so, so I think that, when the storytelling comes from a genuine place, and people are willing to listen, then it doesn't feel, it doesn't feel gimmicky, I guess, for lack of a better word. So, um, maybe that. And then also, I think uh, we have tried to kind of move away from this overly romanticized notion of culture to actually to look at or what we've done with Sophie, which is to kind of look at the brewer as a brewer and say that it can stand on its own amongst all of the other brewers, and let's not sell it short by kind of always having to have this romanticized cultural aspect to it. So I think you can take a lot of the cultural aspects and kind of use it for innovation and design and how you want to develop the coffee market going forward, and not overly rely on, hey, let this be a big piece of nostalgia and this is why you should buy it. So to kind of move away from that and to actually say, like, here are objective reasons for why this coffee is good, or objective reasons for why this product is great, outside of just this feel good story that sometimes we see being done, both in terms of coffee stories being told, and then objects from producing countries and the global south being marketed abroad. So I don't know, that's sort of my incoherent response to that question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the insight. We have one more question in the Q&A. We have one more minute, so I'm not sure if we're going to really be able to get to a long-winded answer for this one, but do y'all see sustainability premiums becoming a long-term feature of green coffee pricing, or will this remain niche? If anyone has some last words here, feel free to hop in, unmute. Any thoughts on sustainability premiums? We can also move this conversation to the alumni network, but yeah. Okay. Ashley?
I was say this is another I hope so.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think you know, I work with companies who already do this, who tack on whatever it is, 10 cents, however many cents per pound towards projects like this. And, you know, it's already baked in to the price per pound. And so it's something that I feel like is more easily, you know, easily thought about as far as like a P&L in the books. It's already there. It's not like another bucket that we have to put it in or take it out of. So I hope it becomes more of the norm. And I think, you know, just speaking for my company, my experience over the past year with coffee prices, obviously it's scary, and like so we are seeing how our coffee is moving, you know, single origins versus blends. We are seeing that change a little bit, but we are also still seeing, you know, we did 2 price increases already this year, and people are still wanting coffee and people are still showing up and purchasing coffee. And we saw our cost of goods for the last month, you know, still be at a pretty good pretty good percentage where it didn't feel painful and scary. And so that was really a nice surprise. And so I think you know, if anything, we are seeing that people still want to continue to lean towards specialty, and they want those specialty companies to be doing the right things. And so if anything, that's a hope that we can continue to absorb those costs and also pass a little bit of it on to support coffee and producers.
Yeah, great. An optimistic final answer here. Oh, Octavio, hand
Yeah,
raised.
very quick.
We're right a little. Go for it.
Yeah,
Go for
very
it.
quick.
Really
In
quick.
practice, these premiums have not changed the structure of the system. They remain niche. The question asked because they operate within the same extractive logic. The idea that we can pay a little extra and call it fair. Sustainability isn't a bonus; it's a baseline.
Great point. Thank you all so much for volunteering your time to share your knowledge and insights with the community here. Our next webinar is on the 6th of November, and we'll be talking about the value of coffee. So it will definitely be a very interesting conversation, and I think prove to be very valuable wherever you are in the world. Thank you, Octavio, Ashley, and Namisha. Thank you to Sarah, who unfortunately had to hop off because of a power cut, but we're hopeful to be able to connect with her later and kind of get any last words from Sarah. So thank you all so much.